welcome to the Artist as Storyteller Speaker Series. My name is Steph Hankinson, and I'm Humanities and Drama faculty at South Seattle College. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our moderators for today's conversation with Seattle-based Filipinx cultural worker in music, poetry, multimedia, and transformative justice, Nic Masangkay. Now, before I introduce Paul, Krisna, and Nic, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement to set our intention and our energy before we become immersed in our conversation. We would like to acknowledge that the Artist as Storyteller project is located in West Seattle, the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Members of our team were born and raised on the traditional lands of the Suquamish, S'Klallam, Tongva, Chumash, Shawnee, and Kickapoo tribes. And we would like to honor the stewardship of these indigenous peoples whose land and stories we now have the privilege of having been shaped by. Thank you. Now, a bit about the Artist as Storyteller series for those of you who are joining us for the first time. The series was fueled by the desire to put BIPOC artists, performers, and activists directly into conversation with students and the community to create new spaces for human connection and celebrating creativity in all its forms. Our first season explores adaptation, resiliency, and environmental justice in the time of COVID-19. I'd like to welcome our student moderator, Krisna Mandujano. Krisna is a recent South Seattle College alumnus. She was born in Chiapas, Mexico, and spent most of her childhood living undocumented in the US. These experiences have strengthened her passion for community organizing. In response to the pandemic, Krisna has started a rental assistance fund to help the undocumented Latinx community. She plans to dedicate her life to public service and learn more about how to make change through artivism. Our faculty co-moderator is Paul Kikuchi. Paul's a musician and an educator of Japanese and European descent. His music ranges from drone and ambient soundscapes to works for traditional Japanese instruments. He draws inspiration from the exploration of personal and collective identities and the desire to build community. Paul leads the music department at South Seattle College, where he's committed to the decolonization of music curricula and the cultivation of lifelong connections to music. And now I'm going to turn it over to Paul to introduce Nic.
Thank you, Steph. And welcome everyone to the Artist as Storyteller series. Before I even do any talking, I'm just going to kick this off with an excerpt of one of Nic's newest songs, Star. So let's start there together so we can ground ourselves in Nic's amazing work, and then we'll dive into the conversation from there.
Life has no meaning anymore, does it? When I get back to you, give you all of life.
You shouldn't have to be beside to find another star, but the sky falls apart as you break my heart. You shouldn't have to be beside to find another Stargazing while the world just burns bright. Stargazing while the it shouldn't have to be this hard to find another star, but the sky falls apart.
Nic, welcome. This song and video is so good, and I'm so pleased to welcome you here today. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you for showing that and for having me today. I'm so stoked. This the Artist and Storyteller series is really awesome. So
Great.
thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And Krisna, really happy to have you part of this conversation as well today. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited to be here.
Right on. Excited to have you here. So I'm going to continue a bit with Steph's introduction of Nic and Nic's work. So pleased to have you here, Nic. Nic is a cultural worker in music, poetry, multimedia, and transformation. Nic identifies as Filipinx, sick and disabled, and is a queer and trans survivor. And I actually want to just intersperse some of Nic's own words here because Nic is has such an amazing way with words and is such an amazing poet and writer. In Nic's own words, following years in a personal state of survival, I reemerge in 2021 thriving. I am loved and ready to love. I know my power and where that can take us. We are living in unprecedented times, and every day I feel the people's universal fear of the unknown. Change is here. We have summoned it for so long, and now that it arrives, will we show up? Are you ready to let go of the way things were, how we got here? Post-survival, will you finally love like the world is ending? Like you are ready for what you asked for? I promise I am with you when it all needs to end. So let us begin. So with Nic's words, let us begin. I first heard Nic's music in March of 2020. This was right before the COVID-19 pandemic started and the lockdown. Just before this event, we were talking amongst ourselves and kind of laughing that like, wow, that's like just being at a packed house event is like right now it's even hard to conceive of that, right?
Yeah.
But this was just like, I feel really fortunate that this was my like last concert before the lockdown because it was a great one. And it introduced me to Nic's music. And I think the thing that really struck me when Nic started performing was just how electrifying of a performer Nic is, how just fully immersed and engaged in the music Nic is. That immediately struck me. But the resonance after the concert for me was more about the thematic content in Nic's music. And because it's been a dark year, right? I mean, the pandemic has been a dark year. And you know, some of Nic's music is also very dark, but I also find a real hopefulness and joy and love embedded in there too. There's that duality, and I think that that's what's like had me coming back to your tracks this last year, Nic, after being introduced to your music. So I've just been really looking forward to being able to chat with you about music. With Krisna also, and Krisna and I have had a really fun time bouncing questions back and forth together about how we want to engage you in your work, not only with music, but with poetry, with community activism. So just so pumped to have you here, and thank you for taking the time to be in conversation with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate all these kind words. My goodness. I'm like, does the Zoom show I'm blushing? Like, yeah. So thank you so much. Yeah, really stoked to be here and chat with you all and meet everyone.
Awesome. And you know, on that note, I'm actually going to turn things over to Krisna, who's going to get us started with the conversation with the first questions. And Krisna, thanks for being here. And I'm going to mute myself and let you go for it.
I have a couple compliments too. I was gonna say I love your high notes, the falsettos. Those were
Thank
amazing.
you.
Yeah,
Thank
those
you
were
so
really
much.
good. I was like, oh, whoa. But yeah, so you're clearly a multidisciplinary artist with an intersectional identity. So you're breaking the gender binary and also breaking societal art boundaries. I guess can you talk about your evolution as an artist and the intersections in your work between poetry, spoken words, and songwriting?
Yeah, thank you so much. I love the question is like already so deep. Question number one. Woo, let's go. Um, yeah, I mean, evolution as an artist. Since I was really young, like growing up, I just loved art. And one of the main things that I loved to do was just sing along to music everywhere. And I grew up on like the Backstreet Boys and like boy bands and stuff. And that was actually really informative of like my gender as like, someone who was a little girl. And who didn't fit into gender roles at the time even still. So then but fast forward to moving to Seattle at around like 18. I got involved as a youth poet at UW, University of Washington, because that's where I was going at the time, and they had just started a new spoken word group, and that connected me to Youth Speaks, and so I was mostly doing poetry at the time. Since then, at some point, I got more disabled. I learned that I was a child sexual abuse survivor from from repressed memories, and so I had like a nervous breakdown, and this was a couple years ago. I was in a very low point, and I kind of had to withdraw, so I stopped doing art publicly, and mostly that was through spoken word, like slams or open mics or just events. But what actually at that time, when I wasn't doing art publicly, I learned how to produce music actually. And music had always been something in my life that I could just, I could put my headphones in and process like all of my like secretive emotions without like anyone else hearing literally. So I wanted to, I was really looking for a way to have like agency in my story because I felt very lost and low. So producing music really helped me do that, learning how to. And then eventually, as I started to heal more, I was able to go back into doing art publicly again. And when I was booked for the events at that time, I was like, you know what? I've been working on music. Is it okay if I try to, they booked me for poetry initially, and I was like, is it okay if I just, try this out instead? And they're like, yeah, sure. And I just figured like, if they don't like what I do, then I just don't have to, do it publicly then. But it turns out, I tried singing, I tried to show my production and songwriting and things. Um, and this was a sick and disabled queers event at Gay City. I remember that. And the response to my music was positive. So since then I've just been kind of doing a lot of kind of what you're talking about, kind of I guess a non-binary like approach to being an artist. I would say that like today I'm a cultural worker in music and poetry, multimedia and transformation. And that's probably not even encompassing, but it's the closest I can get, I I'm not in one discipline because that's not really my I just can't box myself in. I don't think anyone can be boxed in. And I think that's why the poetry and the spoken word and the songwriting can intersect. And I think I'm not really focusing on the artwork isolated from the world we live in. All of my art comes from where I can best use my power, given my place in the world. So healing myself, those I can reach, and dismantling oppression from, the privileges I have too. Yeah.
That's so dope. Thank you. And I'm sure that also when you talk about intersections, there's a lot of intersections between the stories that you're trying to tell, which is kind of leading into the next question that I want to ask you. That
Sure,
question
yeah.
is, what stories are you trying to tell through your work? What are some of the major themes of your work? And also, what motivates you to highlight trauma and resilience in your spoken word, which is something I can relate to. So I'm really appreciative. Or your vulnerability to share trauma, because I know a lot of people go through it.
Yeah, totally. Oh, do you write too? Are you do you also write about trauma and resilience, or like?
No, I think I used to when I was in high school, but I stopped.
Yeah, totally.
I think I definitely should, because it is definitely a way to cope. It was for me, at least. So.
Yeah, no, totally. And I would say, like, at the end of the day, I'm just sharing my story of who I am and how I exist. And I think part of that is like, acknowledging that there's um, there's an art and beauty to making it in this world as like someone with a lot of intersecting oppression, as someone who's Filipinx, sick and disabled, queer and trans, a survivor, and who goes through that trauma and resilience that, like, I understand. And also, like, and Krishna, you were talking about understanding, and like a lot of other folks, be going through it. So like, I think that's also, those are the stories that I'm trying to share, because I'm trying to put an everydayness to the ways that our people need to survive, and also the ways that we can thrive, after that, not just get through it.
Yeah. What would you say are like major themes in your work?
Yeah, right now, hope is a big one, and how it really feels. Because I think, and usually I'm trying to complicate, I'm trying to complicate a lot, because I think like hope, for example, it comes with a lot of grief and transformation. And I think we're like taught, for example, things like other themes that I have in my work, like love, eroticism and sex, romance, Filipino diaspora. I think some of these themes can be fed to us in really simplified ways, and things um, uh, like going back to hope. I think it doesn't always feel good. Actually, it's really hard to hope, especially when you're having to go through a lot of trauma and access your own resilience. So like that's an example of just like, some of the themes I have, but also how I try to complicate the way that we're taught about those themes. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Nic.
Yeah,
Amazing
thank
answer.
you.
Yeah, I mean,
Questions.
I love how you're speaking about hope and just kind of the nuances in that, and um, how often it can be used superficially, right, without acknowledging the kind of hardship or the kind of circumstances that we're hoping through, right?
Yes.
And I think that I maybe never really kind of thought of it in quite that way, but the way you speak of it is really deep. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank
Um,
you. Thank you for
I'm
listening.
I'm curious, like, it's evident that so much of your work now is about community and is about like reaching out to others to, well, you said something in what in your previous answer about understanding and being able to access your power, right? To be able to affect change or to be able to help others. And, um, when you mentioned that dark time you were experiencing, that was really just a few years ago, right? And you've obviously worked through a pretty difficult time in your own life. You said you had to withdraw a bit from your art making during that time. I'm wondering, like, when did you know that you were able to then look outward again, or like reach out to be able to extend that caring to other people. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
what
I
point did
love
that?
that. You know, I think part of it was realizing that, you know, there's a reason I say like I publicly withdrew, because from art and sharing art, because the art never left me, right? It was I just didn't notice that I still had it with me, even though I was, you know, really, you know, adamant about learning how to get a certain sound in Logic Pro to sound the way I needed to sound in my music production when I was just learning, because I was so lost that I just didn't have anything else to bring me any purpose. But I just always felt called to, at that time, try to work on something new with music. And I just knew that I needed that time alone to heal myself, you know, because you know, I couldn't show up for people also at that time in the ways that they deserved. So I think that's such an important part of healing trauma, and undoing the violence that causes that trauma so that you don't repeat it. And I felt right. It felt right to return to publicly sharing, honestly, because of the people who still stuck around, and they happen to be artists in community. You know, shout out to Shelby Handler, Tara Hardy, uh, Leah Lakshmi, Pyapshana Simrasinha. These folks are who, when I was talking about being booked again for events and asking, hey, can I try? Oh, I want to say Billy Rain too. Anyway, OG Riot Girl, actually. And it was that they were still there even when I was going through it, and they still saw that like I had something that needed to be shared. So I would say, you know, the love of people in community and the spaces that, you know, I share with folks. So
Yeah, great. Yeah, I love that you call yourself a cultural worker, because like it encompasses so much, right? And like
yeah.
you said, like you're like, I guess this sums it up as much as I can. And
Yes.
but it's, you know, it's like, I think it acknowledges the all these different intersectional ways that you're connecting with people and with community through your work. You know, I realize as we're talking here, I forgot one little piece of my intro too, which is to our audience who are viewing here today. We'll have a Q&A probably in the next 5 or 10 minutes or so. We'll turn this conversation over to audience Q&A. And so if you're in the audience today and you have some questions for Nic, go ahead and you can either type them into the Q&A now, or we're going to cover some more ground before we turn it over to the Q&A. So you might just hold your questions, get them ready, and then when we turn over to the Q&A and you have some things you'd like to ask Nic about, you can go ahead and drop them into the Q&A, and then we'll get them to Nic too. So I forgot to say that. I want to make sure I let our audience know that. So Nic, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk more about your music making process, and your creative process. So you're coming from a poetry background. You have developed this amazing skill of beat making and of composition and production. Like, what comes first for you, or does it totally depend on the song? Like, do you have lyrics and poetry that you're then creating music for? Do the beats come first? Like, how do you approach it?
Yeah, totally. It's so, well, I'm not gonna say random, but it depends for sure. I've definitely written, I've definitely turned poems into songs. I've definitely have had melodies come first. I think because I think a lot about production and nerd out with that a lot. Um, a lot of the time, like with my song, this song "Star" that you shared earlier, that was started first with the Korg mini log, and I was practicing sound design because I had just gotten it actually because and so I was just like, oh yes, what can this do? So and it was one of my first analog synths too. And so that was very new for me to move from analog synths rather than just the software synths on my DAW, which are like great too, but I had just been using them because that's what I had. And so the Korg mini log was really fun. I remember my best friend was like taking a nap on my bed in my room, and we were just hanging out, and I was playing with making an arpeggiator pattern, and I was sound designing. I wanted something that's like, I love a distortion or like sawtooth texture. I love, it's like candy to me. Yes. And so I was playing with that, but also I'm really inspired by like also the kind of that like low pass filter sound that's coming out because of I'm sorry, I got a call. A low pass filter sound that that comes from like producers kind of more from like contemporary music, pop music. I feel like Drake would be like an example of like, well, he's just coming up in conversation a lot today. He came up earlier when this event started. But anyway, so I was just mixing sounds, and then I put my drum machine with a beat to it, and then I was also processing something, and I was like, I kept thinking about what was worrying me was I had just started connecting with people again in intimate ways that I had really closed off myself to because of my healing process. So then when I was writing Star, I just kept thinking, how will you love when the world is ending? Oddly, it was right before, like very much right before COVID. So that was like, I was like, wow, that got a little too real. But yeah, so then the lyrics just came out too. So that's like an example, but it's always different. It really just depends.
Yeah, it makes me think also just about how we as artists interact with our medium, and how sometimes like when we've been doing something for a long time, it's easier to get in ruts, or like, you're just kind of like, you have a way of doing things. And when I hear you talk about like just kind of discovering music, or like realizing you had this passion for music production, which wasn't that long ago, I'm imagining like, especially when you were in that really dark place, right? I'm imagining that there was something about that medium being really new for you, that it was really exploratory and maybe different than the process of writing. Is that true? Or what was that like exploring music?
Oh, wow. I love that. That's so true, especially because, and I had grown up doing music too, but not as seriously. I had piano lessons, and I learned.
The truth comes out.
Yeah, it was really cute actually. Like my, I grew up in New York and New Jersey, and in New Jersey, when I was growing up, there was this Filipino auntie who taught a lot of the Filipino kids and community how to play piano. She was just like a family friend, and that was her thing. That was like her side hustle. And it was really cute to go to the recitals, and it's just like a lot of a community of Filipino families, and like we're playing like Filipino classics on the piano and whatever. So that was like my first instrument. And so it was actually almost a way of coming back to it, because I didn't really pursue it super. I didn't really focus on it or think about it much when I moved to Seattle, and I was mostly writing, like poetry. And so when I was kind of at that low point, yes, for sure, when it was something totally new, to learn how to produce music, so cathartic. And it was just refreshing to have something new to figure out, because like it's so tiring to figure out your own trauma, and to figure out how you're going to have resilience to get through. And I just felt so hopeless that I was like, well, at least I can channel my agency into getting something to sound right,
Totally. At least
in
I
a
can
new
figure out
way.
the spin. Yeah.
Yeah, so it,
Yeah.
yes, completely was so helpful that it was something new. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I really one of the things I thought was so cool about watching your show was I feel like you really share like your production process. Let's see if I can find a way to say this. So like a lot of music, the production is really kind of buried, like it's so multi-layered and like embedded that it's hard to kind of like pick apart like what the pieces are, right?
Yeah.
And some of your songs, the thing I really love about them is like the way you build your introductions. You can really hear like compositionally your production process, like the different parts as they layer. And the song Sick is one of those. And I actually want to play just a short clip of that introduction so our audience can kind of hear your production approach, at least for that song, and watch you interact with some of your tools. Great sounds. I mean,
Thank you.
I can tell, how much time you spent really crafting those
Thank
specific
you.
sounds for that production.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. And
especially
so,
from you. So thank you.
well, what do you, so for some of our audience who might be here today, maybe who write poetry, who are like, oh, wow, like I could do music too. Like, what do you suggest as far as like getting musical tools, getting instruments? Like how would you suggest people dive into that process?
Yeah. I think my main advice is to just do it. Like, like release the inhibitions and just try it. Cause like, I don't think it's helpful to take yourself too seriously right away, or ever really. That's how I started. I was just messing around, and like it's always about sharing a story. So even with like making beats and like production, it's like, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to evoke? Why are you doing this? And I think that leads to like what kind of sound you want, and then that leads to like what kind of tools you're going to use. I think researching is really important, honestly, research can look so many ways. It doesn't have to just be Google and YouTube, although shout out Google and YouTube. I mean, maybe not the companies. I'm not really trying to endorse capitalism really that much, but at all. But yeah, just like researching like that is helpful for me. Also, just like research can look like, you know, like feel free, if you have questions about producing, feel free to DM me. Or like reaching out to your peers, your friends, people you look up to, just reaching out to people who you think seem friendly and would be down to talk about it, especially if it's like with synths or like producing. I feel like producers or like musicians in general, we love to talk about what we're using and like our process with like our instruments and things like that. So
Nice.
yeah, those
Yeah.
are some things I would say for
Awesome.
starting. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. So I think that my next question for you actually is about social justice and community, but I feel like we've already kind of dove in a bit to those topics. And for the sake of time, I actually want to jump ahead and have Krisna kind of jump to the next question that talks more about ancestral healing, because I want to make sure we touch on that. And then I think after that question, we'll be able to do a transition and start fielding some of our audience questions too.
Yeah, okay. I'm really excited about this question because I think I connect a lot with it. With how you talk about ancestral healing, and I know you mentioned earlier that you were very spiritual. And I read more about what ancestral healing meant to you through your website. So I guess my question for you is, how does that spirit or ancestor or essence of your ancestors motivate you to write?
Yeah. I needed well, actually, okay, I'll start with you know, being a child sexual abuse survivor. It's intergenerational trauma and healing that, and historical trauma, things that go, you know, intergenerational things are really important to me, because if you're working through that trauma that gets passed into generations from, for me, a lot of it is from colonial violence as a Filipino, then you're that is part of undoing a lot of the violence that personally happened to me as you know, when I was a child, you know, experiencing that from someone of a different generation who's older than me. And it gave me I think connection to a spiritual connection to those who have already passed. And I think in general, thinking more about grief and death and how that is actually transformation in ways. That's really core to, it's really core to my work, because, you know, I was very close to death in, you know, those dark times that we were talking about, where, you know, a lot of suicidality, a lot of, you know, things with flashbacks. It's so because of like really having a lot of challenges with hoping and building resilience, I think it's also helpful to think beyond yourself with it makes me feel less alone and less hopeless, because I'm thinking about how ancestors helped persist so that I could be alive today and do what I do. There's a lot of things that I'm able to do now that, you know, my ancestors only dreamed of, but wanted, maybe not for them even. And, you know, a lot of them probably knew that. But so like it helps being able to trust in something that's bigger than myself, and it's not necessarily like and I was raised Catholic too, so it was something that was, and that did a lot of harm to me personally and systemically. So having kind of knowing that there is the things that I can believe in that are beyond myself are the fact that, like, yeah, there are people in my bloodline, or not even in my bloodline, in my communities, who have persisted and then passed and made it possible for me to thrive. And believing in that gives me a lot of motivation for anything I'm doing, not just the the art. And that's probably part of why I call it cultural work, because I think, not everyone who's super focused on just the art or the technique is necessarily thinking about um, or the reasons they do it aren't always about, healing or ancestral healing or etc. So yeah.
Thank you. Oh, um, I guess I kind of had like a thought that kind of came up, and that's like
Yeah.
that I
I'd
think
love to
when
hear
I
it.
was also going through like a dark period, and it kind of had like thoughts about like suicide, um, trigger warning, but uh, when that was happening, I think like when I started to lean more towards like ancestral healing and really understanding more of like what my ancestors went through, whether that's like doing research, that helped me see like you're right, like death and like grieving in a different light, and that pushed me more towards hope. um
Yeah.
so thank you for talking about that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for sharing. That's validating to me too. I'm sure to a lot of other
Yeah.
folks. So thanks for sharing.
Nick, on your site, and forgive me, I don't remember exactly which writing excerpt on your website this came from, but I noticed you talked about traveling to the Philippines, either traveling to the Philippines or like envisioning traveling to the Philippines. And I
Oh,
was wondering
okay.
if you could speak to that as far as like, what is, the homeland of your ancestors, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what do you feel like your connection to that land is? And have you had a chance
Mm.
to spend some time there? And if so, what kind of impact did it have? Or if not, how do you feel about that process of going there?
Wow. One day I do want to live there for an extended period of time. I'm actually trying to build my connections to local artists there. Slowly. Been talking to some folks in Manila, um, and um, I think, and this might resonate with some other folks who have uh, experience with diaspora because of colonialism, but I had a lot of shame before when I would visit, and because they talk about it being like your homeland, and also not really fully belonging in the US as brown folks. And but then when you get to a place that you didn't grow up in, I was born in Queens, New York. I wasn't born in the Philippines. And when you get there and like it's too, like, I was not used to the weather. The first time I visited was, I think, third grade. And so just a lot of um I had a lot of shame and trauma associated with it. And I remember the last time I visited was a long time ago, I think 2010, with my family and my blood family. And I and I always was I I had always been like, I want to go back, but I want to go back like when I'm ready, when I've processed all of this backwash of um colonial trauma. And I do feel a lot more ready now because I've done a lot more healing. I've gone through my own self-transformation, I'm starting to build there. And when I and part of that also is like recognizing like the privilege of being an American in today's configuration of the world. That's a very huge privilege that we have here. So I'm always trying to, that's part of the reason I'm trying to personally connect with artists in the Philippines. I don't want to just imagine something that is not. I think that's actually objectifying the people there. I want to actually connect with what's really going on. So yeah, I guess I would say like I'm kind of in the process of that. I do eventually, my families have places there that I want to use eventually. When I'm there, I would love to do more cultural work there, more art. I love the music scene there, the underground Manila music scene. Ooh, really great. They have a really great sense of community too. It honestly reminds me of Seattle. Manila Community Radio is part of how I was able to actually get like more closely connected to folks.
Oh, wow.
Especially queer and trans people there too. Yeah.
Cool.
So.
What would you say the music scene's like? Is it kind of like DIY, like a lot of electronic music? Like what's the vibe like?
Yeah, totally. It's so obviously I'm not an expert, but what I've heard so far is there's a lot of I think I'll use Jess Connolly as an example. So Jess Connolly actually, so she's a Filipino Australian artist who she kind of started in her career as more of like a Filipino pop artist, but she wasn't as into the sound, and she decided to collaborate more with the producers in the Manila underground scene. So her sound is very like influenced by them and created by them. It's electronic and R&B mostly. Most of the people that I'm connecting with there also are like DJs who are doing like who are into like house, and like a lot of queer and trans folks there are looking into like hyper pop and club music. So I see a lot of electronic for sure. It might be because that's also what I'm interested in. There's also, I really enjoy their a lot of the indie rock there too. So yeah, those are some
possible collaborations maybe.
Honestly, like they're just so, that's another thing too, they're just very welcoming. Especially that radio station I was telling you about, literally you could pitch a show from wherever and they're like willing to think about it. So like maybe.
Yeah, totally. And speaking of collaborations, I'm wondering, I've only seen you perform solo. Like, have you ever tried performing your music like with a full band, or is it usually just you and your gear? Like what are your thoughts on that?
Oh my gosh, before COVID, I was trying to put a band together actually, like for my stuff, and then COVID happened, so it was like, well, we can't really get together. So but as things as people get vaccinated and all these things, I'm getting together with more people, and I mean, not I wouldn't say more people actually.
That's true. That's true.
One person.
Yeah, exactly. Just seeing one more person feels like more people at this point. So really that's the scope. But like just being able to jam again with people in person is something that's like beginning to happen. I just got I'm almost fully my 2 weeks after the second vaccine are almost done. So
nice. Nice.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll see more band stuff soon.
Totally. Well, Nic, there's more compliments than questions in the Q&A feed right now.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Krisna, do you want to read the Larry's comment here in the Q&A? I'm not sure.
Oh, Larry! Wait, can I just say? Oh, sorry. No, you read the question first, and then I will And then I will talk about how.
Well, like I said, it's actually.
Can you tell? I remember watching you perform in a slam poetry competition probably 10 years ago, and your control of the audience was so striking.
Oh, thanks, Larry.
So that was the first one. He has another one. So the other one was, that question was fully answered. Thanks. As a former professor of yours, I'm so proud of all that you are doing.
Larry, thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Larry was one of my was one of my professors at UW when I was like, gosh. Wow, time really flies. I'm just like, how old was I? Like, I don't think I was even 21 yet. Yeah. Larry, you were so dope. You like explained, I still remember how you explained Marxism, and like I finally understood. So thank you so much. And like, yeah, just our class conversations were always so good. So yeah, shout out Larry. Thank you.
Nice. Yeah, Larry is in the house, but we have not given him privileges to speak. So he's a silent voice in the background here in our webinar. But yes, shout out to Larry for sure. Well, Nic, I want to move towards. Oh, Larry says, wise not to invite me in the Q&A. So I just want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. And, you know, like Krisna said earlier in the conversation, just being willing to be so vulnerable about your path through trauma, and like how art and music has really helped you process and kind of emerge on the other side of that trauma. So thank you just for being so real and so vulnerable in this conversation, and taking the time to go there with us.
Oh, thank you all so much for having me. Super, super fun to like, just talk with you, Paul and Krisna, and, meet everyone, even if it's not face to face. Yeah, I'm just very thankful that y'all even wanted to listen. And, this conversation is also like a super legit and real healing thing too. So yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, just being in community really feels great right now, doesn't it?
So much. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. And so, we, for our audience, Nic has all of your social media links are up on your website, and the Artist as Storyteller site will have links to all of the ways to follow Nic's work as well. Nic, do you have anything that you want to share with us about things that are upcoming, or things we should know about your work? Or, I know we're still in the pandemic, so probably not a whole lot of performances listed yet, but probably just following you on social media is the best way right now to stay informed.
Yeah, and actually this Saturday I'm doing a really brief workshop at ACES, which is the Artists of Color Expo and Symposium. And so one of my offerings that came with the release of the Song Star is coaching people through transformation, people, groups, and situations, or organizations. So if you want a kind of crash course in that, that is this Saturday, the 15th. It's free you just have to register at ACES. And if you follow my socials, you will see the links and things like that. So yeah, come through. And then I have, just working on stuff. You'll see it.
Cool.
Yeah. Thank you all. Yeah.
Nic, I don't know if this is odd to ask you this at the end, but I acknowledge that in my going through this event, I totally forgot to invite you to do a short spoken word. And I'm wondering now, like, that might be a really wonderful way to close this out, is for you to share just a little bit of spoken word with us, if you're okay with that. And my apologies for forgetting to ask you sooner in the event.
Oh my gosh, no worries at all. I'll share one.
Awesome.
Thank you. If you are to be in my life, you will love yourself. And with me, you will celebrate my love for my own self. And then, and only then, will I get to love you. It's legitimate not to, but I am done bearing the casualties of self-pity turned violent. So if that's where you are, turn around right now. My power is seeing yours. And if you deny your own force, there's nothing else I can do but protect myself and move forward. I have always known someone else's hands on my body because they chose not to remember they had their own. But now it is my time because it is also your time. And if you think you can steal that triumph from me, bring me back down to the underbelly of wound again, after all the tooth and nail I scraped bone dry, bleeding to birth myself into a truer form. I did not crawl through violation and sweat, journeyed on hands and knees to be mocked by your own fear of yourself. Only if you confront the doubt of who you are before change. And it need not be perfect or brash or strong today. I've seen so many discover in the quiet curl of caving into oneself weeping, and then the next day a beaming struggle, not conquered, but at peace. Or maybe it's the casual laughter of love turned inward and outward simultaneously, expansive joy for once, not after or before or despite, but just alongside all the pain. It looks so different for everyone I meet and get to cherish on whatever level. Each confrontation of personal fear is as unique as a face. When you can square yours to the mirror, or the past, or the dream, or just me, I can tell you are ready for me to hold you.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Nic, for sharing.
That was stunning. Thank you.
We're all like, like, where do we go from here? That was
Oh my God.
Thank you for sharing your many gifts with us today. It's such a delight to be in the presence of like an artist and a thinker and a feeler that really brings their whole experience to bear on the art and the way they walk through the world. It's just such a pleasure to talk with you, and we're so privileged, and so I'm so grateful for your sharing of stories today. And Krisna, same for you, and Paul. This was just such a special conversation to be a part of. So thank you for being here today. And you know, like Paul said, I want everyone in our audience to know, or anyone that's watching later on, watching the recording, that they can follow you on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, under your name, and that'll all be linked on our website. There's also opportunities for them to check out your fantastic website, which I was raving about earlier. And so we'll be sure to link to that as well, so that folks can connect and meet you in all of these other ways that you show up, not just on Artists as Storytellers, but everywhere in Seattle and what's to come. So those links will be posted there. And I also wanted to share really quick before we go about our next event that's coming up. Our conversations are continuing all the way through June, and we're talking next week with next Tuesday, May 18th at 1 o'clock again, with the multidisciplinary artist and founding member and tattooer at the Bad Apple Tattoo group, and that's with Emma Kate Shaw, who's going to be here next week talking about the mission of Bad Apple Tattoo, making and creating multidisciplinary art during the pandemic, and about Emma's commitment to integrating aesthetic experiences into community and living as an act of love and being a critical part of building an art practice. And so I think it'll really sort of dovetail with a lot of what Nic was talking about today. And so I would love to invite folks to join that conversation and see the ways that creatives around town are moving into visual mediums too, right? And using tattooing as a form of expression and intimacy that makes me just think about everything we've shared today too. So yeah.
Great. And Nic, the event on Saturday you mentioned, if there's a link for that or something that you want to send us, we'll include that up on our site as well, in case folks are able to tune in also.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks again, Nic, for joining us today. You're amazing.
Thank you. You all are amazing. Yeah. Wow.
What a delight. Well, thanks again. And we hope to see everyone next week at the Emma Kate Shaw chat.